Hey fellas, Dane here. Today I have a Shockwave Slayer, something that's been on my build list for a while, like cool mappers to try and play, that sort of thing. But it can be really expensive to start and it needs a hefty down payment. I did my usual sniffing and rummaging around Pee Wee Ninja, even older videos, but things have changed. Some stuff can't even really be realistically utilized anymore, like Combs gloves. Something like that might just mean that what you're looking at is just outdated. There's tree changes, bass tree changes, new jewels are in. So, as usual, this video is going to be like my little spin on something that's already been around. I'm just giving it a different paint job. Um, and then with this league, expenses are kind of down. Some prices are just upside down. 3 digit divine items are like one. Some items are, pennies to the dollar, so keep that in mind. It's still a few hundred divine budget with the current economy, but then I also have a cheaper POB that I'll kind of go over and show what and where you can take away to get it running even cheaper. And then in the future, it might help identifying where you can slim things down on other builds, but who knows. For mapping, it's entirely T16 focused with the league mechanic spam and generally whatever I want to run. Boxes are really powerful this time around because of how they interact with just everything the league mechanic has to offer, all flames as well. So you can do other types of content with this build, I'm sure. It might need a couple changes. And, at the end of the day, just do whatever's fun for you. And then by mapping focused, I did try to cut down on some buttons, at least if you want to play and farm a lot, like with the automation gem. And I think it's a little bit more fun in general, especially if you're planning on doing longer sessions. Someone like myself, my hands will hurt after a while, so I really do heavily consider how many buttons you need to press and how often. It's a little bit squishy depending on your playstyle. I guess most importantly, it's like which altars you click. If you do endgame mapping, you really need Wrath of the Cosmos or Eldritch Gaze. It's kind of like mandatory, and sometimes the mods are just brutal, and it's not always a matter of don't click it when you're talking about, like, possibly multiple divines for that click. It's no, you gotta suck it up and deal with it, which ends up kind of being like a drive-by playstyle. You could think of it kind of as an auto bomber, but only for a few seconds at a time, really. It's still really fun. It's melee. It's incredibly front-loaded. At a moment's notice, you'll have one, if not multiple shockwaves that deal huge damage in a single hit, wide AoE, so you get big stuns, big chills, and big fortify as well. And in a league like Necropolis, where there's a lot of stop, do a thing, stop and go, click a box, essence, walk into a boss room, boss jumps, phase, all of that stuff, where typical melee kind of might lose its damage because of ramping, you do the opposite where you are actually like building up burst damage. So in that way, it feels really, really good and really, really smooth. And then this little bit of footage here, what you see is what you get. They're 8 mod, corrupted, delirious maps, whatever. And the only mods I don't take is no regen and cooldown reduction. And it's just farming boxes, all flames, scarabs, whatever you want to do. But this is the most fun Atlas strategy that I do. So that's pretty much all the footage I got. Okay, so let's get into the meat and potatoes. Here is my current setup, save for like one thing, I think. So, in a max damage scenario, each shockwave is going to be doing about 6.9 million, and your static strike ticks or whatever are about 2.8. So whatever that means. And so let's say you have your 5 shockwaves and they just start unloading. It's a lot of damage. I don't know how much damage. I'm not a math guy. Everything else, as you can see, is pretty fair. You have Withering Step. You have Wither on hit, actually. I think it's fine. The tree, this and the budget tree look pretty much the same. I don't think this is revolutionary as far as strength stackers go. The only big thing I've changed, really, is I don't run 2 stat clusters because I'm still poor. And I don't do this where they go along the bottom. They grab this, maybe put an inertia here I've seen. You get Golem's Blood, and you get some crit here. I think it's trash. I think it's just a huge waste of points. That being said, I make questionable decisions myself all the time, but it's a lot of points for a lot of QOL and patching up of your build that you might need to do, especially when you are on a budget and your character isn't super high level. So, next I would say we'll go over the jewels quick. So this Fractured Ink Effect, this is made at a time where Fracturing Orbs are only 2 divines. So, and I hit it first time, so I guess, you snooze, you lose, or whatever. These are probably still cheap. Warning Call on the Warcry cluster I think is really important. I have Rattling Bellow here. This is bad. This is just straight up bad, right? So the exerted attack only applies to the static strike portion, which doesn't mean like a whole lot. I mean, I guess it helps a little bit in clearing, but you can get Mob Mentality for Endurance, Power, and Frenzy charges on Warcry, and you can get Onslaught for 4 seconds on Warcry, which is like the far superior of the ones. It's the one I was using before I decided to use a Silver Flask. And then, side note, for whatever reason, I'm pretty sure there's like a breakpoint at like 240 or something like that. So, yeah, random side note here. The only thing that's maybe different about this tree, besides like that I have like a budget-ish cluster here, like so you want Overlord, heavy hitters, whatever, and weight advantage is like fine because you get strength once again, but you need the jewel slots. I have a impossible escape over here at Ancestral Bond because you can get Purity of Flesh. You can hit this reservation efficiency, which means you won't need an Enlighten 4 for this like aura tight setup, and you won't have to spend like all these points like doing all this like wasted travel points, right? And then this right here is going to take care of your power charges essentially. Gain power charge when you stun, at least for mapping and some like your bosses and stuff. This skill hits so hard in like one strike that you are gonna stun and keep your charges, and especially if you have Mob Mentality, if you get a refresh on one of your stacks, it's like fine too. And the encounters are so short, like with bosses and random stuff like that, and these are all pretty punchy nodes. And Mace Chill, because you hit so hard, you're gonna be chilling all the time. The mods, obviously you want percent strength. I have double damage, and Warcry buff effect, and you can get physical taken as fire, I believe. So for like your more budget options, you might be able to get like a bunch of nodes with taken as and Warcry buff effect, which is not ideal, but you can have 4 or 5 functional notables. And if you plan to take like battle ruse for increased meta reservation, let's say you're changing some of the other trees or you really want an aura, like if I had a limited budget, one of my dreams would be to run like Herald of Ash, right? Just for the extra overkill burn or something, because this hits so hard. If I had a couple other like dream items that I could just slap on my character too, but that's just not the case. I have Impact Jewels for my Forbidden Flesh and Flame. I got them as a pair for 90, and as in each individual jewel at like 6 or 6.5 damage each. It's not the worst in the world, but you get the quality of life, like the strike range, accuracy, things like that. The rest of the jewels I think are still pretty standard. The Unnatural Instinct for all the strength, regen, all of that kind of stuff. I'm a big Rational Doctrine fan. This completely optional, but it also takes care of like curses if you don't want to use a flask affix. And I think that's it. Oh, and I guess I'll give a mention to the Balance of Terror. So I use this. I don't think a lot of people do. I can't remember. I think I paid like 5 divines for this one. Maybe it was 7. This gives increased cooldown recovery if you've cast Temporal Chains. That's why I have Temp Chains in the build at all. And it inflicts Withered for 2 seconds on hit if you cast Despair. So Despair is like a fine curse to manually run if you need single target, or let's say there's just like a big dense pack of monsters. You have enough AoE that it like you despair the screen. So your shockwaves and your static strike will apply despair, and you get the global cooldown recovery for shockwave and all of your defensive cooldowns, your guard skills, all your instant crap, right? So I think and you get some cooldown on your mark on hit. So it's very, very good, I think, to have the temporal chains and the withered on hit balance of terror. If you can only afford one, I would highly suggest you get the wither on hit one, because you'll save the gem from not running temporal chains, and you'll have despair, right? So you will, it just fits a lot nicer than running just the temp change, which doesn't matter nearly as much from like the damage that you're going to get from despair and the wither on hit, especially if it's a target that survives the shockwave onslaught. It's going to have like max withers on it. And so what is the cooldown here? So it's 0.6 with temp change, and it's 0.7. So pretty solid here. I think that's all there is to say about this. Getting your shockwave to 21, so you get the 5 uses. All of these are pretty good. You almost never want to run increased critical strikes. If you decide to awaken or a crit, you might not need overwhelm, and you would just gain 2 jewel slots like that. But I think overwhelm is pretty good, even if you have 6 or 7 crit on your weapon. Like, actually, Calandra's Touch, pennies this league. It's as good as the ring you can afford in this slot. And then I'll go over budget options here. I think all of this is really standard. If you can't afford a % strength amulet like me, Eyes of the Great Wolf for the attributes, if I didn't already cover that. And then Bismuth for the res. And I have Avoid Stun, and I have 1 Avoid Stun tattoo, so I don't need Unwavering Stance. Even though I have no evade, I don't like that line that says you cannot evade. So even though there's low fizz max hit, still have max block and stun avoidance. And on the 8-mod corrupted maps, the only mods I don't take are cannot regen and cooldown. Now for the less recovery maps, this is actually the 4% to recover 10% life on kill or whatever, and that takes care of all your recovery when it's like 200% less recovery, all of that stupid nonsense from the explicit map mob tree. And for the maps or the altars that strip away all your defenses completely, you can have a steel skin gem swap if you so choose here. So I believe that covers it for kind of the items here on this one. It's so many uniques, there's actually not a lot to go over. And then I will go over the budget version quick. So all this stuff is like basically the same. You would maybe drop temporal chains if you had a different mod. So then Flesh and Flame are gone because you can't afford that. And then Rational Doctrine is gone because you can't afford that. So it look like this. And your tree largely would be the same. If you're not high enough level, you can like drop this, maybe a mastery, something like that. And this might be like a regular cluster, kind of like this. Whatever would give you the most damage, I would assume. And this would be Onslaught, because you're not getting it through a Silver Flask. And this would be like a Life Flask. And you might not even run Basalt. Maybe you run, I don't know, Taste of Hate, something like that, just for the damage taken as or whatever. So this is the super budget version, where you go Hunter Elder, Hunter for pen, Elder for AoE, and then you squish it. Hope you have an open prefix, and you would want just spell damage. I don't know why I did non-chaos as extra at the time. It must have been decent. Helmet, you would have like no mods on this, but you still need elevated crit. You could skimp right on resistances and have a worse pair. Astromentus at home, basically. Still really want Whispers of Doom on here. This is like a serviceable amulet. These have names because this is literally what I was using before I could leapfrog my gear upwards. Amethyst, 2 of these with high res and strength, or in this case, I had a Catalyst Triple Res Amethyst ring to help me allow myself to be greedy in other slots like the belt, because the belt, even if it's not a mage blood, is a lot of damage, because you can get percentage strength, which is not that expensive, and then you can essence it for strength and stats that look good, and most importantly, like, put the cooldown recovery on it, so it's still 30% damage on a build like this, which is like really important. Oh, let me turn it to, so this is what it actually looks like when you're mapping. It's still fine. This much damage in one hit is still clearing a lot of stuff. You just might not be running maybe as much explicit mods on your atlas, and you might turn it down so you can turn the speed up. You might be sticking to temples so you can make sure you can one-shot everything until you can get the money for it, that sort of stuff. And then for possible budget options, one of the only tricks I have for you to get this crit back up is Techrod's Gaze. So this gives you strength, which is important, and the 40% increased main hand critical strike chance per murderous eye jewel affecting you. So you have one here, he counts for himself, and he counts for his homie. So if you have two here, they don't have a limit of one, they count for each other. So it's equal to having 4 murderous eye jewels, and you see you jack your crit from 83 to 80 to 96 and 98, right? Just one is not going to cut the cheese, and just two is, like 3 times better than 2 or 1 or whatever. See? And so now this is a little bit more respectable, right? And then you have one more where maybe you can do a little bit of mana reservation, maybe you can do stat, maybe some crit multi, maybe you need a little bit of attack speed. And I went with strike range on this as well, so I'll show you here once again. So this is 1.8 strike range, which is like pretty unfortunate, because you don't have the impact scaling because you're on a huge budget. But that 0.2 is that difference right here. So the more you have, let's say the box is here, you can hit it once again, and that extra strike dude will hit stuff while you're facing away and help your QOL for clearing to make it feel as smooth as possible. So for budget options, that's pretty much what I got for you. Maybe you can still, once again, get like really cheap Watcher's Eye. I don't think Chaos Res is cheap for Purity of Elements, but you could get multi with precision, flash charge on crit with precision, armor or fizz damage reduction, or even crit reduction, right? And on my current POB, crit reduction corruption is one of the most accessible corruptions I think you can get on an armor that doesn't screw up your 15% life mastery for not having a life mod. So I think that is the long and short of it. I tried to keep this one a little bit concise, add a couple budget options, and just show kind of the inner workings of the strength stack build and what it looks like when you put, maybe a couple hundred divines in it. I don't normally play characters that are this expensive at all, but it was really fun. It was really cool. So if you decide to give it a shot, I hope you have a lot of fun doing it. And kind of trust the process of the stat stacking. If you haven't done it before, the more you have, the more powerful it is, and sometimes you really just need to kind of push towards that light at the end of the tunnel. A couple upgrades could make the build feel like completely different. That could be the difference between your hit damage and call damage combined really, killing the mobs or not. So with that being said, if you're still playing the league or made it this far in the video, thank you, and hope you have a good rest of your league.